I would like to invite you to get active immediately, not just wait for the US election, because, and I want you to join the International Peace Coalition. The next meeting is Friday, 5 o'clock European time, 11 o'clock US time. The reason why this is so urgent is because we are going, in my view, in the most important and dangerous period probably in all of history. The reasons for this is the following. We have beginning of July, the NATO annual summit. And I think given the fact that the Ukrainian war is really running into trouble, and but for the new weapon systems, it would have ended already, because it's the people are not there, the soldiers are not there. And, this will be an incredible moment, because NATO has an immense reputation problem, an image loss in the eyes of the world. NATO already lost shamefully against 65,000 Taliban fighters in Afghanistan and left Kabul in August 21. You all remember the images of people hanging onto the airplanes, trying to get out. They were abandoned, by the way, by the NATO, the so-called locals who had worked with NATO for 20 years were left behind. That should be a lesson also for the Philippines and the Ukrainians. And now the war in the Ukraine is lost by NATO. I mean, what does it mean if the entire force of NATO, with all the weapons and all the incredible monies which were spent, were not able to defeat the Russian army, which has a military budget which is about 10% of that of the United States? An image loss which is incredible, and that increases for the time being the danger, that a nuclear escalation could happen out of this dynamic. Then we have another problem. We have the idiotic policy that some people, Janet Yellen, the EU, they want to confiscate the Russian assets, which they confiscated already, but to spend them for Ukraine. Now, even the IMF has warned that they should not do that, because that would put at risk the entire financial system, because Russia already has announced that they will retaliate and confiscate US and European assets, and that could trigger a whole chain reaction of such developments, because that will be read by the global south as one more reason to de-dollarize, because it's not safe to be in the dollar. Then you have the BRICS summit in October. That will be, in all likelihood, a very spectacular event where many, many more countries, up to now there were 59 countries who announced that they want to be part of this new system. That will be also, a point where the West has to really reflect what to do. And then naturally comes the November election. Now, I think we need to think not only of mobilizing in this entire period between now and the US election, because I think this is an extremely dangerous period, but also because if we do not introduce another component into our thinking, a new way of approaching the whole idea of humanity, of are we the creative species or not. And I would like you to remember what happened actually in 1945, when Germany was completely a rubble field. You remember the pictures of Dresden after the bombardment. Many other cities were looking almost like that. And at that point, and that is, by the way, one of the reasons, responding to the earlier questions, would the Western leaders today not do what they do if they would understand nuclear war? I think the problem is a generational and a cultural problem, because I remember very well in Europe, the World War II generations, they knew what war was, and they told our generation, we didn't experience it, but I have all the stories told by my grandparents, by my parents and relatives, about the horrors of war. And that is sort of in my genes. And, the new generation, which is completely shallow-minded, and they don't know history, they don't know culture, they don't know what the classics is. So they are being brainwashed by all of these manipulations. and they just don't get it. And I think, the older people and the younger people have to get together. Now, what happened in 1945 was that the shock about how could Germany, this beautiful pearl in the nations of countries, which it was during the time of Bach, of Mozart, Beethoven, of Schiller, of Goethe, how could such a nation which had produced so many inventors and so many creative individuals sink so deep to the level of Nazism and the 12 years of the horror show of what Nazism meant? Well, I think people were so shocked that there was a soul surging, and people said, we have to give ourselves a higher lawfulness, that this can never happen again. And there was a big debate about natural law, that we have to have something which is more fundamental than positive law or whatever people do and say. And that this natural law in European history was the idea that there is a higher lawfulness which is built in creation, which we have to access and which is valid and which is functioning in the real world. Now, unfortunately, that debate about the use of natural law as a very practical aspect in legislation, in lawfulness, was abandoned. It was abandoned by the occupying powers. It was vanished by the Frankfurt School. It was eliminated by the Congress of Cultural Freedom, which started the re-education to eliminate any such profound ideas. And that is part of the tragedy, why people don't remember this period, which was a very important moment of recollection. How could this tragedy have happened? And that is why in the new security and development architecture, which I have proposed, the last three principles refer to these epistemological foundations on which the new paradigm has to be built. So I would urge you to look at that, study it, and let us bring this into the debate, because I think we need this higher lawfulness. In Europe, it was called natural law. In India, it is called cosmology. In China, it was called the mandate of the heaven. And, in every great culture and nation, you had this idea that there is such a higher lawfulness on which we have to agree because we are human beings. And I think that has to be part of the discussion, because we have to uplift humanity very, very rapidly to a higher level of morality if we want to survive this great danger.